My life was measured in spirals. 138 cast iron steps up, 138 steps down. The rhythm of it was a comfort, a predictable pattern in a life I deliberately stripped of unpredictability. From the lantern room of the Port Blossom Lighthouse, I could see the whole of the island, the tidy spine of Main Street, the tangled woods of the interior, and the sprawling, dark-shingled house that sat alone on the westernmost cliff. His house, Arthur Vance. Most days, my job consisted of polishing brass that had been polished the day before, checking the alignment of the great Fresnel lens, and giving tours to the handful of tourists who made the trek out to the point. I'd recite the history, the shipwrecks, the keepers, the automation in the 70s, and I'd hold out a small wooden box for tips. It was enough. Enough to pay the rent on my small cottage, enough to keep my old truck running, enough to maintain the quiet solitude I had mistaken for peace. I had routines. Coffee at dawn on my porch, watching the lobster boats chug out of the harbor. The climb up the tower. The slow, methodical work. Lunch on the catwalk, feeling the salt spray on my face. The afternoon tours. And then, at dusk, I'd often see him. A solitary figure walking the cliff path below his house. He never came to the lighthouse, never joined a tour. He just walked, his hands in the pockets of a dark jacket, his gaze fixed on the horizon where the sea met the sky. The islanders called him the Millionaire, a term spoken with a mixture of suspicion and awe. He'd bought the old Hemlock Point estate 10 years ago and had mostly kept to himself. He funded the new wing of the library and paid for the new engine in the ferry, quiet acts of civic duty that were accepted with a grudging respect. But he remained an outsider, a man defined by his wealth and his privacy. To me, he was just a shape against the sunset, a fixed point in my daily observations, and the subject of a quiet, foolish yearning I never gave a name to. I kept a small, smooth piece of sea glass on the windowsill in the lantern room. It was the color of the sky just after the sun has set, a deep, hazy blue. I'd found it on the beach below his property line one morning. It felt like a secret, a small, tangible piece of a world that wasn't mine. Sometimes, when I was up there alone, I'd pick it up, its coolness a stark contrast to the warmth of my own skin. It was a habit I didn't examine too closely. Then came the notice about the autumn gales. The Historical Society, which technically owned the lighthouse and its grounds, sent a letter. The usual warnings. Secure what you can. The budget is tight. Do your best. The outbuildings, the old keeper's cottage and the oil house, were in a sorry state. Their shutters were rotting, their foundations slowly surrendering to the relentless damp. Doing my best wouldn't be enough to keep the wind and water out. I felt a familiar knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. I loved this place, and I was powerless to protect it properly. A few days later, old Mr. Henderson, the grounds caretaker and my closest thing to a boss, trudged up the path to the lighthouse base. He was a man made of sea-worn timber and pipe tobacco, and his face was a roadmap of island weather. He held a folded piece of paper in his gnarled hand. "Got a proposition for you, Leo," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. Board had its meeting. The usual song and dance. "No money for the repairs you wanted." I nodded, unsurprised. Disappointed, but not surprised. I figured as much. "I'll do what I can with what we've got." "Well, now, that's the thing," Henderson said, tapping the paper. Someone else stepped up. "A private donation, you might say. Enough to do it right. New timber, copper flashing, the works. And enough to pay a man a fair wage for his time." He squinted at me. "That someone is Mr. Vance. He's on the society board, you know. He asked for someone reliable. Someone who knows the grounds." I gave him your name. My heart gave a strange, jarring thump against my ribs. Arthur Vance. The proposition was no longer about wood and nails. It was about him. It was a circumstance that would breach the comfortable distance I had so carefully maintained. An opportunity, framed ethically and with clear boundaries, but an opportunity that terrified me as much as it thrilled me. "He wants to meet," Henderson continued, oblivious to my internal turmoil. "This afternoon, down at the keeper's cottage. To go over the work." I simply nodded, unable to form a word. A meeting. With him. The quiet foundation of my life felt like it was about to shift. That afternoon, I walked down to the keeper's cottage with a hollowness in my gut. The air was cool, carrying the sharp, briny scent of the coming storm. The cottage sagged in on itself, a picture of gentle decay. And he was there, standing on the small, weathered porch, looking not at the cottage, but out at the sea. Up close, he was different from the distant figure on the cliffs. Older, for one. I'd put him in his late 50s, maybe even 60, while I was still on the shy side of 30. His hair was thick and silver, swept back from a high forehead. There were lines around his eyes, not of stress, but of observation, as if he'd spent a lifetime looking closely at things. He wore a simple navy sweater and dark trousers, clothes that were obviously expensive but worn without a trace of vanity. He turned as I approached, and his eyes met mine. They were a startlingly clear gray, the color of the ocean on an overcast day. His gaze was steady, assessing, but there was a softness in it that the island gossip never mentioned. It wasn't a look that measured my worth, but one that seemed to simply see me. "Leo," he said. His voice was just as I'd imagined it might be, low and warm, with a calm resonance that seemed to settle the air around us. It was a voice used to being listened to, but he used it gently. "Thank you for meeting me, Mr. Vance," I replied, my own voice sounding thin and young by comparison. A small smile touched the corners of his mouth. "Arthur, please," he gestured toward the cottage. "Mr. Henderson speaks very highly of you. Says you care more about this light than anyone has in 50 years. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck. "I just try to keep it standing. That's becoming harder to do," he said, his gaze shifting to a shutter hanging by a single rusted hinge. He stepped off the porch and ran a hand over the peeling pane of the windowsill. His hands were what I noticed next. They were large and well-kept, but they were not the hands of a man who'd never worked. There was a competence in them, a quiet strength. "The board's budget doesn't stretch to cover the past. I'd like to change that." He looked at me again, that clear, direct gaze pinning me in place. "The money is taken care of. What I need is someone I can trust to use it well, to do the work with the respect this place deserves. Are you that person, Leo?" The question was direct, a simple business proposition, yet it felt like something more. It felt like a test of character. I stood up a little straighter. "Yes," I said. "I am," he nodded slowly, a flicker of something, approval, perhaps, in his eyes. "Good. Then let's walk through what needs to be done." And just like that, the quiet, solitary orbit of my life had been entered. A new, larger body had exerted its gentle gravity, and I knew, with a certainty that was both frightening and exhilarating, that my predictable spirals would never feel the same. The work began the next day. The materials arrived on the morning ferry, a small mountain of fresh sawn cedar, gleaming copper, and boxes of galvanized nails. It was more than I had dared to hope for. It was enough to do the job not just adequately, but perfectly. I spent the first morning prying off the old, rotten shutters from the keeper's cottage, the wood crumbling in my hands like dry cake. I expected Arthur to disappear now that the funding was arranged, to retreat back to his cliffside house and leave me to it. He did not. Around 10 o'clock, he walked down the path, carrying a silver thermos and 2 ceramic mugs. He didn't announce himself, just set them down on the porch railing. "Coffee," he said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You don't have to do that," I said, feeling awkward, my hands covered in dust and splinters. "I'm aware," he replied, his tone even. He twisted the cap off the thermos and poured the steaming liquid into the mugs. The rich, dark aroma cut through the damp air. But I wanted to. He held a mug out to me. I wiped my hands on my jeans and took it. Our fingers brushed for a fraction of a second. A simple, meaningless contact. But a jolt went through me, a spark of warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee. It was a strange and unsettling feeling. I took a quick step back, mumbling my thanks. He didn't supervise. That was the most surprising thing. He didn't stand over my shoulder or question my methods. He'd pull up one of the old wooden chairs from the porch, the one that didn't wobble, and he'd sit and read a book. Or sometimes he'd just watch the sea. But he was there, a quiet, steady presence at the edge of my workspace. At first, it was unnerving. I was used to being alone, to the simple company of the wind and the gulls. His presence felt like a weight, a gaze I could feel on my back even when he was looking at his book. I found myself fumbling with tools, measuring boards twice, my usual competence deserting me under the pressure of his silent observation. But as the days went on, the feeling began to change. His stillness was not judgmental, it was calming. It was as if he were standing watch, not over me, but over the work, over the place itself. Sometimes, he would get up and help without a word. If he saw me struggling to lift a heavy new shutter into place, he would simply be there, taking the other end, his strength making the task easy. We'd work in tandem, a silent, efficient team, and then he would retreat to his chair, and I would go back to my hammering. I began to notice the small things about him. The way he'd push his silver-rimmed reading glasses up the bridge of his nose with one finger. The deliberate, unhurried way he moved, as if he never saw the need to rush. The deep lines that fanned from the corners of his eyes when something I said made him smile, a rare but potent occurrence. One afternoon, I was on a ladder, fitting a new window frame into the upper floor of the cottage. A sudden gust of wind caught the frame, and it twisted in my hands. I lost my balance for a second, the ladder skittering on the uneven ground. Before I could even register the danger, he was there. His hands were on the ladder, steadying it, and one hand came to rest firmly on my lower back, a solid, grounding pressure. "Careful," he said, his voice low and calm, right beside my ear. My entire body went rigid. I could feel the warmth of his palm through the thin fabric of my t-shirt. It was not a casual touch. It was a deliberate act of protection. He held me there for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, a beat of stillness where the only sounds were the wind and the frantic hammering of my own heart. Then, just as quietly, he removed his hand and stepped back. "The wind is picking up," was all he said, as if he hadn't just sent my world tilting on its axis. I climbed down the ladder on shaky legs, my back still tingling where he had touched me. I avoided his eyes, focusing instead on gathering my tools, my movements jerky and uncoordinated. The comfortable silence we had built was suddenly charged with a new and potent tension. In the quiet of my own cottage that night, I replayed the moment over and over. I analyzed it from every angle, trying to strip it of emotion and see it for what it was, a simple, reflexive action. He saw me stumble. He steadied me. That was all. To read more into it was foolish, a product of my own loneliness. But my body remembered the truth of it. The solid weight of his hand, the steady warmth that had seeped into my bones. It was the first time in a very long time that someone had touched me with such unambiguous care. It was a gesture that spoke of strength and gentleness in equal measure, and it undid me in a way I hadn't been prepared for. I started to wonder about him, truly wonder. What was his life like in that big house on the cliff? Was he lonely too? The island gossip painted him as a recluse, a man who had everything and wanted nothing to do with anyone. But the man who brought me coffee every morning, who sat in quiet companionship while I worked, who steadied me without a second thought, that man didn't seem like a recluse. He seemed patient. He seemed like he was waiting for something. The more I watched him, the more I saw the quiet power in his restraint. He could have hired a whole crew to do this work. He could have managed it from afar. But he chose to be here, day after day. He chose this proximity. And I began to allow myself a dangerous sliver of hope that he had chosen it because of me. I found myself talking to him more, breaking our long, companionable silences. I'd tell him stories about the lighthouse, about the keepers whose ghosts were said to still walk the spiral stairs. He was a good listener, his gray eyes focused on me, a small, encouraging smile on his lips. He rarely spoke about himself, but he asked questions about me, about my life before the island, about what had brought me to this quiet edge of the world. I gave him a carefully edited version of my story. The failed attempt at a city life, the job that had gone nowhere, the relationship that had ended with a quiet fizzle, leaving me feeling hollowed out and adrift. I told him I'd come here seeking simplicity, a place where the world was reduced to rock and water and sky. "And have you found it?" he asked one afternoon, his gaze soft. "I've found the simplicity," I admitted, looking away toward the lighthouse, its white form stark against the graying sky. "The piece is still a work in progress." He was quiet for a long moment, and I thought perhaps I had said too much, revealed a crack in the self-sufficient facade I tried so hard to maintain. "Peace often is," he said finally, his voice gentle. "It's not a thing you find. It's a thing you build." Much like this cottage, I looked back at him then, and the understanding in his eyes was so profound, so complete, that I had to look away again, a lump forming in my throat. He saw me. He saw the loneliness I tried so hard to hide. And he wasn't frightened by it. He wasn't put off by it. He was simply there, a steady, reassuring presence in the midst of my quiet storm. The work on the outbuildings progressed. Under my hands, and with his quiet support, the keeper's cottage began to straighten its slumped shoulders. New cedar shutters, the color of honey, replaced the gray, splintered wood. The roof was patched, the windows reglazed until they shone. We worked together to rebuild the crumbling stone step at the front door, a task that required cooperation and a shared rhythm. One afternoon, as we were mixing mortar, he paused, wiping his hands on a rag. "I was married once," he said, his voice quiet, matter-of-fact. The statement hung in the air between us, completely unexpected. I stopped what I was doing, my heart giving a strange lurch. "Oh," he nodded, his eyes on the horizon. "A long time ago. It was a good marriage. We were happy." He took a breath. "She passed away 12 years ago. Cancer, I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling small and inadequate. "Thank you," he said, turning his clear gray eyes back to me. "I came here afterward." The quiet helped. He paused, and a flicker of something vulnerable crossed his face. But quiet can curdle into something else if you're not careful. It can become silence. It was the most he had ever revealed about himself, a small, precious key to the locked rooms of his past. He was sharing a piece of his own loneliness with me, bridging the gap between us with a thread of shared human experience. He wasn't just the wealthy benefactor. He was Arthur, a man who understood loss and the deceptive comfort of solitude. The day the storm was due to hit, the sky was a bruised purple-gray. The wind had a vicious, biting edge to it, and the sea was a churning cauldron of white-capped waves. We had one last big task: boarding up the large picture window on the seaward side of the cottage. It was a two-man job. The space inside the small living room was tight. We had to move around each other, a close-quarters dance of passing the drill, holding the heavy plywood sheet steady against the force of the wind that rattled the glass. Our shoulders brushed. His arm grazed mine as he reached for a screw. Each point of contact was electric, a small explosion of awareness in the charged atmosphere. We worked with an easy, unspoken communication, anticipating each other's needs. He was strong, his movements economical and sure. In that small room, with the storm raging outside, the differences in our age and our wealth seemed to dissolve. We were just two men working together, a team united against the elements. When the last screw was driven home, plunging the room into a dim, protected twilight, we stood back. The roar of the wind was muffled now, a distant beast clawing at the walls. "That should hold," I said, my voice sounding loud in the sudden quiet. "Good work, Leo," he said. He was standing very close, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the doorway. I could smell the clean, fresh scent of his sweater, a hint of soap and the salt air that clung to him. We stood there for a long moment, the air thick with unspoken things. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing inside me. I wanted to close the small distance between us. I wanted to know if the steady calm he projected ever wavered. I wanted to ask him why he was really here. As if he could read my mind, he spoke, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "I worry, sometimes," he began, not looking at me, but at the newly secured window, "that people misinterpret my help, that they see it as interference, a way to control things." He finally turned to look at me, and the vulnerability I'd seen before was there again, clear and unguarded in his eyes. "My intentions here were simple. I wanted to make sure this place, a place I've come to care about, was safe. And I wanted to ensure the person doing the work was treated fairly." He held my gaze. "I hope you know that. I hope you don't feel obligated in any way." It was an open door. He was naming the power imbalance between us, acknowledging it, and giving me a clear, unambiguous opportunity to set a boundary. He was offering me an out, ensuring my comfort and my agency above all else. And in doing so, he showed me more respect than anyone had in a very long time. My throat felt tight. "I know," I managed to say, my voice raspy. "I don't feel obligated." I mean, a visible wave of relief washed over his features. He gave me a small, grateful nod. "Good," he said softly. "That's good to hear." The moment stretched, fragile and shimmering. The storm howled, the cottage held firm, and something new and delicate and terrifyingly hopeful began to take root in the protected space between us. He had shown me his softness, and in return, my own carefully constructed walls began to crumble. The storm passed during the night, a blustering tantrum that left behind a world washed clean. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and the air smelled of rain and wet earth. The cottage and the oil house stood firm, their new shutters and repaired roofs looking solid and reassuring. I felt a surge of pride, a sense of accomplishment that was deeper than any I had felt in years. We had done this. I was sweeping debris from the lighthouse path when a rental car pulled up and a couple of tourists got out, cameras slung around their necks. They were the first visitors since before the storm. I put on my guide persona, ready to recite the history of the light. As I was talking, Arthur walked down from his house, presumably to inspect the results of our work. He gave me a quiet nod of greeting and stood off to the side, giving me space to finish my tour. The man, a loud, florid individual in a brightly colored shirt, looked from me to Arthur, then back again. A smirk played on his lips. "So this is the Millionaire's new pet project, huh?" he said to his wife, just loud enough for me to hear. "Fixing up the lighthouse, hiring the local talent." Quaint, the words landed like a punch to the gut. All my insecurities, all the anxieties about our differences, came roaring back. I was the hired help. The local talent, a project. I felt my face flush with a hot, shameful heat. I opened my mouth to say something, though I had no idea what, but my throat had closed up. I chanced to look at Arthur. His expression hadn't changed. He remained perfectly still, his hands in his pockets. But a coldness had entered his eyes, a stillness that was more intimidating than any outburst would have been. He didn't look at the tourist. He didn't dignify the comment with a reaction. His focus remained on the sea, but I could feel the protective anger radiating from him like a physical force. The tourists, sensing the sudden chill in the air, finished their pictures and left quickly. I stood frozen, the man's words echoing in my head. Pet project. The phrase was a brand, marking me, defining our relationship in the ugliest possible terms. When they were gone, Arthur walked over to me. I couldn't meet his eyes. I felt diminished, embarrassed. He didn't apologize for the man's rudeness. He did something far more meaningful. "That was unfair to you," he said, his voice low and firm. "My presence here has put you in a position I never intended. A position that invites that kind of speculation." He was taking responsibility, not for the tourist's boorishness, but for the situation itself. He understood, without me having to say a word, how the comment had landed, how it had played on my deepest fears about our dynamic. "It's not your fault," I mumbled, staring at a crack in the pavement. "It's not yours, either," he countered gently. "But you're the one who has to bear the brunt of it. And that isn't right." He was quiet for a moment. "The work is done, Leo, and it's excellent work. You should be proud. Don't let the ignorance of a stranger take that away from you." He put a hand on my shoulder, a brief, firm squeeze of solidarity. It was a gesture that said, "I am on your side. We are on the same side." And then he turned and walked back toward his house, leaving me to process the quiet, fierce way he had just defended me. He hadn't caused a scene. He had simply stood by me, absorbed the ugliness, and then, in private, validated my feelings and reinforced my worth. It was the act of a man who protected what he valued, and it made the silence between us untenable. That evening, the sunset was spectacular, a riot of orange, pink, and gold that set the sea on fire. It was my last official duty of the day, the sunset viewing from the lantern room. Usually, it was a quiet affair, sometimes with a few tourists, often with just me. Tonight, there was only one attendee, Arthur. He paid the small admission fee, his hand brushing mine as I gave him the ticket, a jolt of electricity passing between us. He followed me up the 138 steps in a comfortable silence. In the lantern room, the light was magical, bathing everything in a warm, ethereal glow. He just listened, his gray eyes watching me, his expression unreadable in the shifting light. When I finished, he didn't move to leave. He walked over to the thick glass of the lantern and looked out at the horizon, where the sun was a blazing sliver of crimson. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of the day's events, of all the days that had led to this moment. "You love this place, don't you?" he asked, his voice soft. He didn't turn to look at me, but I knew the question was not a casual one. "Yes," I said, the answer simple and true. "It's steady. It does its job, no matter what." I admire that he was quiet for another long moment, the last of the sun dipping below the waves, plunging the world into a deep indigo twilight. The automated light beside us began its slow, sweeping rotation, a blade of white cutting through the darkness. He turned from the window then, his face half in shadow, half illuminated by the rhythmic flash of the beacon. "And what about the people on the island, Leo?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you let any of them in?" The question landed in the center of my chest, precise and unavoidable. He wasn't asking about my social life. He was asking about him. The moment where I had to choose between the safety of my solitude and the terrifying, beautiful possibility he represented. I feel the cool glass of the lantern housing at my back. The rhythmic sweep of the light illuminates his face, then plunges it into shadow, again and again. A beacon, searching. His question hangs in the air, a tangible thing. "Do you let any of them in?" My breath catches. This is it. The door he held open in the cottage, the one I was too afraid to walk through, is right here in front of me again. I can let it close. I can give a non-committal answer, make a joke, and retreat back down the spiral stairs into the safety of my small, lonely life. The thought is a cold comfort. Safe, yes, but empty. So incredibly empty. The memory of the tourist's sneer and the quiet, solid way Arthur stood with me in the aftermath flashes in my mind. He didn't fight my battle for me. He stood beside me so I wouldn't have to fight it alone. He has shown me, in 100 small, quiet ways, that he is a safe harbor. The risk isn't him. The risk isn't staying closed off forever. I take a breath, the air tasting of salt and ozone. I meet his gaze, holding it through one slow sweep of the light. Now. It has to be now. I say, and my voice is a rough, unfamiliar sound. It's tight, strained with the effort of pushing the word out past years of guarded silence. I'd like to let one in. The world seems to stop. The wind dies down. The only sound is the soft whir of the lamp's motor and the frantic beat of my own heart. In the intermittent flash of the light, I see his expression change. The careful neutrality is gone, replaced by a raw, naked hope that mirrors my own. His eyes search mine, asking for confirmation, asking if he dares to believe what he's just heard. He takes a single, deliberate step closer, closing half the distance between us. The air grows thick, heavy. "Am I the one you're thinking of letting in?" he asks, and his voice is impossibly gentle, stripped of all artifice. It's not a challenge. It's not a demand. It's a plea. A vulnerable, honest question that lays his own heart bare. The last of my defenses crumbles. He is not the island millionaire. He is not my employer. He is Arthur, a man who sees me, who values me, who is standing in front of me, asking to be let in. Yes, I breathe, the word a quiet surrender. "You are." He closes the remaining distance in another slow step. He doesn't rush. He gives me every opportunity to retreat. But I am rooted to the spot, held fast by the soft gravity of his presence. He lifts his hand, the same hand that steadied me on the ladder, and gently cups my jaw. His skin is warm, his thumb stroking the line of my cheek in a gesture of infinite tenderness. It is not a claim, it is a question. "Is this okay?" I lean into his touch, a small, involuntary movement that is my answer. A shudder of relief passes through him, a barely perceptible tremor in the hand holding my face. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever felt. He leans in, and his lips meet mine. It's not a kiss of fire and passion. It's a kiss of arrival. It's slow and deep and sure, a quiet confirmation of everything that has passed between us in unspoken glances and shared silences. It tastes of salt and coffee and a profound, soul-deep relief. It feels like coming home to a place I didn't even know I was searching for. He is so gentle, so patient, as if he's trying to memorize the feel of me, as if he's been waiting a very long time for this moment. I bring my own hands up, resting them on his chest. I can feel the steady, solid beat of his heart under my palm, a rhythm that matches the one thrumming in my own veins. The kiss deepens slightly, a mutual exploration, a question and an answer all at once. It is right, unshakably, fundamentally right. When we finally part, it's only by an inch. He rests his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the cool air. His eyes are closed, his expression one of quiet wonder. His other hand comes up to find mine, his fingers lacing through my own, a warm, solid link between us. The great lamp continues its silent, sweeping turn around us, illuminating our small, private world. The foundation of my life, the one I had built so carefully on the bedrock of solitude, has shifted. And in its place, something new and infinitely stronger is settling. Something built for two. The following morning dawned gray and misty, the island shrouded in a soft, quiet fog. It mirrored the uncertainty in my own mind. The kiss in the lantern room had felt like a destination, a moment of absolute clarity. But in the pale morning light, the old anxieties began to creep back in, quiet as the mist. What now? What did that kiss mean? Was it a fleeting moment, a product of sunset and charged emotions? The reality of our differences came rushing back. He was Arthur Vance, a man of wealth and standing. I was Leo, the lighthouse guide who lived on tips and a meager stipend. The phrase pet project echoed in my head with renewed malice. Had I just made the biggest mistake of my life, blurring a line that should have remained firmly drawn? I went about my morning chores with a heavy, leaden feeling in my limbs. I polished the brass, but my movements were mechanical, my thoughts a tangled mess. I avoided looking toward his house on the cliff, half afraid he would be gone, half afraid he would still be there. Around mid-morning, I saw him walking down the path. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. He was carrying 2 coffee mugs, just like he always had. The simple, familiar gesture was both a comfort and a torment. Was he pretending nothing had happened? He found me in the lantern room, where I had retreated to, my hands needlessly fussing with the lens mechanism. He didn't say hello. He just set the mugs down on a clear spot on the workbench. The silence stretched, and my anxiety grew with every passing second. "Leo," he said finally, his voice steady and calm. He waited until I turned to face him. His gray eyes were clear, his expression serious but kind. "I don't want you to ever feel obligated or trapped." The words were so direct, so attuned to my unspoken fears, that I could only stare at him. "What happened last night," he continued, his gaze unwavering, "was important to me. More important than I can say. But your independence, your peace of mind, that is just as important." He took a small breath. "I am acutely aware of the imbalance between us. In age, in finances, in our positions on this island. And I will not allow that to become a cage for you." He picked up one of the mugs and held it out. "I want to continue this, whatever it is. But it has to be on terms that feel right for you. That feel equal." He paused, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a single, simple brass key. He held it out on his open palm. "This is a key to my guest cottage," he said. "It's separate from the main house, down by the shore. It's empty. I want you to have it." My mind reeled, confusion and fear warring within me. Was he offering me a place to live? Was this happening too fast? He must have seen the panic in my eyes, because he quickly added, "Not as a gift, not as a place to live, just as an option. A place you can come when you want to. A place you can be, with me, that is away from here, away from the work. There is no expectation attached to it. You may never use it, but the choice is yours. The door is open, but you are the only one who can decide when, or if, you walk through it." I looked from the key in his palm to the sincerity in his eyes. He was not trying to possess me or provide for me. He was actively, deliberately dismantling the power imbalance between us. He was creating a neutral space, a way for us to be together that was entirely separate from the context of my employment. He was giving me all the control. It was the most thoughtful, most reassuring thing he could have possibly done. Slowly, I reached out and took the key. Its metal was cool and solid in my hand. "Thank you," I whispered, the words feeling utterly insufficient. A warm, genuine smile transformed his face, chasing away the last of the morning fog. "The pleasure is all mine, Leo." A few days later, the test came. We had both, independently, ended up at the island's small grocery store. It was the hub of all island news and gossip, a place where privacy went to die. We were standing in the produce section, discussing the relative merits of different apple varieties, when Mr. Henderson, the old caretaker, came shuffling down the aisle. His weathered face broke into a wide, knowing grin when he saw us together. He clapped me on the shoulder, a little too heartily. "Well now, Leo, good to see you're being taken care of, son," he said, with a broad, conspiratorial wink in Arthur's direction. I felt my entire body stiffen, a hot flush of shame and anger rising in my chest. The implication was clear, the same ugly sentiment the tourist had expressed, just phrased with misguided affection. I was being taken care of. I was the dependent, the charity case. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me whole. But before I could stammer out a reply, Arthur's hand came to rest on my shoulder, a calm, steadying weight. He didn't look angry. He simply smiled his quiet, polite smile at Henderson. "Leo's the one doing the taking care of, Henderson," Arthur said, his voice perfectly even and pleasant. "He's been taking care of that lighthouse for years. I'm just lucky enough to get to watch him work." He had done it again. With a few simple, expertly chosen words, he had completely flipped the narrative. He had reinforced my competence, centered my contribution, and positioned himself as the fortunate observer. He had made me the pillar, and himself the admirer. He had protected me, not by shielding me, but by publicly affirming my strength and agency. Henderson, slightly flustered, just nodded and mumbled, "Well, that's good. That's good," before shuffling off toward the dairy case. Arthur gave my shoulder a final, gentle squeeze before removing his hand. He looked at me, a question in his eyes. "Are you okay?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. I was more than okay. I felt seen, defended, valued. I gave him a small, grateful smile. We were a team, a quiet, unspoken team, navigating the choppy waters of small-town perception together. The unease that had plagued me since the kiss finally, truly, began to recede, replaced by a feeling of profound and steady security. That Saturday, I used the key. The decision felt momentous. I held the brass key in my hand all morning, its weight a comforting presence in my pocket as I did my chores at the lighthouse. This wasn't about accepting a gift or moving in. This was a conscious choice, an act of stepping forward, of walking through the door he had opened for me. His guest cottage was tucked into a cove about a half-mile down the shore from his main house, hidden by a stand of wind-stunted pines. It was small and simple, clad in the same dark shingles as his own home, with a stone chimney and a wide, welcoming porch. It felt private, separate. It felt safe. Letting myself in with my own key felt both strange and liberating. The air inside was cool and smelled faintly of cedar and the sea. The space was simple, masculine, and comfortable. A worn leather armchair sat by a stone fireplace. A bookshelf was filled with worn paperbacks, and a large window looked out directly onto the water. It was not a place designed to impress. It was a place designed for rest. It felt like him. He was there, sitting in the armchair by the unlit fireplace, a book open in his lap. He hadn't been waiting by the window, hadn't been watching for me. He had simply been there, present in the space he had offered, letting me arrive in my own time. He looked up as I closed the door behind me, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure, unadulterated welcome. "Hello, Leo," he said, his voice warm. "Hi," I replied, feeling a little shy, a little breathless. He closed his book, setting it aside. He didn't get up, didn't rush toward me. He just watched me, giving me the space to acclimate. "I'm glad you came." "Me too," I said, and the truth of it settled in my bones. We didn't fall into each other's arms. We talked. We sat, he in his chair and I on the edge of the comfortable sofa, and we spoke with a quiet honesty that was new and exhilarating. We agreed to take things slow, to learn the rhythms of each other. We talked about boundaries, defining the line between my work at the lighthouse, which was mine alone, and the new, shared space we were creating for ourselves. He listened more than he spoke, but when he did, his words were thoughtful, his insights keen. He wanted to build this relationship on a foundation of trust and respect, and he was making sure every single stone was laid with care and mutual consent. It was a partnership from the very first conversation. The next morning, I woke up in the cottage's small, quiet bedroom. The sun was just beginning to rise, painting the fog outside the window in shades of lavender and rose. I had not stayed the night with him in his bed, but in the space he had given me, a guest under his roof, but in my own room. It was another small, deliberate act of respect, of giving me space and control, and I was deeply grateful for it. I found him in the cottage's small kitchen, a kettle just beginning to whistle on the stove. He was already dressed, standing by the window, watching the sunrise. He turned as I entered, and his smile was soft and easy. "Morning," he said. "Coffee, please," I replied. We made breakfast together. It was a simple meal of scrambled eggs and toast, but the act of preparing it felt profound. We moved around each other in the small kitchen with the same easy, unspoken rhythm we'd found while working on the keeper's cottage. Passing the salt, pouring the coffee, buttering the toast. It was a simple, domestic dance, but it felt like the most intimate thing we had ever done. It felt like home. We ate on the porch, sitting side by side in two weathered Adirondack chairs, our coffee mugs warming our hands. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, full of a shared understanding. From the porch, we could see the lighthouse in the distance, its white tower a steady, familiar beacon against the morning sky. My home, my work. And here, beside me, was this quiet, steady man who was becoming something else, something more. I looked at him, at the way the early morning light caught the silver in his hair, at the quiet strength in his profile as he gazed out at the water. The fear that had been my constant companion for so long was still there, a faint, distant hum in the background of my mind. But it was no longer in charge. It had been replaced by a deep and abiding sense of calm. The differences between us were still there. He was older. He was wealthier. Those were facts. But they no longer felt like insurmountable barriers. They were just context, the geography of our individual lives. They were not the territory we were building together. That territory was being built on shared values, respect, honesty, and a quiet, deliberate care. He had offered me a contract to repair a crumbling building, a simple, practical transaction. But in doing so, he had offered me so much more. He had offered me a safe place to work, a quiet presence to lean on, and the space to rebuild my own crumbling foundations. He had seen the man I was, beneath the layers of caution and solitude, and had valued him. He turned his head then, as if feeling my gaze, and his gray eyes met mine. He didn't say anything. He just reached over and took my hand, his fingers lacing through mine. His hand was warm, his grip firm and reassuring. And in that simple, quiet gesture, a new beginning was sealed. A hopeful, practical, and deeply welcome beginning, as steady and as true as the light from the tower I called home. Share your thoughts in the comments. What moment stayed with you? If the story resonated, a like helps others find it. Subscribe for more slow burn male/male love stories told with warmth and care.